welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we will be covering a story called Paralyzed. So, it's told in a first person perspective, so I'll be reading it as I have been. I'm writing this anonymously. I didn't come to that decision lightly. I know that no one will believe my story, but I also know that I have to at least try to warn others. I will start at the beginning and try to explain how I made the discovery that will likely lead to my eventual demise. It all started when I was just a child. I can't say for certain the exact time it began, but it's been happening for as long as I can remember. I'm sure you're not interested in that and just want me to get to the actual details, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that this is not something that happened just once or twice. So now let's get on to the details. Every night without fail, sometime between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m., I am visited by entities. Many of you might describe them as shadow people, but believe me that they are not just mere shadows. I'm not entirely sure of what they are exactly, but they are not friendly. All I know is that if I am asleep, I will wake up during that hour and find them standing in varying parts of the room I'm in. And if I'm awake, I will catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye. It doesn't matter how much light is in the room, or whether I'm indoors or outdoors. Sadly, it's been happening for so long that I simply have begun to think of it as normal. I've tried to talk to others about it, being very vague in my details, just hoping that someone else had seen them. I would mainly hear the same stories from others. They would have a moment of sleep paralysis where they could feel someone watching them, but they're unable to move. This is not exactly what I've experienced. I've never been paralyzed in the same way that I've heard others describe. I feel more of a paralysis due to fear, which means that I can move. I just simply cannot seem to focus on my body enough to actually will it to do so. When I see them, it's like my entire attention becomes focused on not moving. I have no idea why I feel this way, but there's an intense feeling when they are around that is telling me to remain perfectly still. As I said, I do not know why I feel this way. It's like there's this intuition or or some primal survival instinct that is screaming at me to not move. I used to try to live a normal life. It seemed that there was nothing I could do to make the beings not come around, so I decided that I was just going to go with it. But unfortunately, this didn't work out for me well in most social circles. Most people were not very accepting of my odd behavior. If they happened to be with me when the entities appeared, they would think I was having some kind of mental breakdown or something, because normal people don't just freeze and show no reaction to others around them, for seemingly no reason, or at least no reason that can be explained. I've tried to open up to a few close friends, praying that someone would at least believe that this was happening to me. I so desperately wanted to not feel so alone and just have someone else know and believe me. It was something I needed badly. They tried to be understanding, usually nodding in sympathy, but I could see in their eyes that they thought I was either lying or crazy. And maybe I am crazy, but I just don't believe that this is the case. I know that sounds like something a crazy person would say, but this is different. I am a very lucid person, not known for flights of fancy, as they say. I try to live in the real world. I'm not someone that cannot separate reality from dream. I've never experienced anything that I would deem an actual hallucination. The shadowy figures that I see every night are very real. I lived a good many years with no real issue. I came to expect the beings every morning just before dawn. They come at varying times. Sometimes they'll show up right at 3 a.m., while other times they will not show up until just a few minutes before 4 a.m. But no matter what time they appear, they always leave as soon as the clock rolls over to 4 a.m. And I mean right on the dot. It's very odd, and for a long time I had no idea why this happened. Of course, if I'm being honest, it took me several years of them visiting before I finally realized they were showing up at around the same time every night, and that they only came during the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. In my defense, when I was a little kid, I didn't really pay attention to the clock. Like most kids, my parents would tell me when it was time for bed, and my mom or dad would wake me up in the morning for breakfast. so I never really gave it much thought. I just knew that they showed up while it was dark. I tried to talk to my parents about it, but they didn't believe me either. Just like my friends, when I later tried to talk to them, my parents never outright said I was lying, but you could see in their eyes they were highly doubtful of my stories. I don't even blame them for that. I mean, what I was saying, it just sounded like another story made up by any kid with a normal imagination. They were understanding and tried to help me. They even gave me a few nightlights for my room, thinking it was likely just the darkness and the lights coming from outside that were casting shadows in the room. Even today, I admit their initial thoughts made sense. In most normal circumstances, that would likely have been the culprit. Just a little kid waking up in a dark room, half asleep, seeing shadows that were just normal items in my room. I wish that were true. But if that was the actual case of what I was seeing, or the cause of what I was seeing, well, there wouldn't be much to this story, now would there? I won't bore you with all the details of every single encounter. It wouldn't add much to the story, as almost all of my early encounters were pretty much the same thing, just repeated. I would wake up, see the shadowy figures in one of the corners of my room, or sometimes standing beside my bed. I would then lay frozen, squeezing my eyes shut until I could at last feel that they were gone. I guess you probably wonder how exactly I could feel that they left. It's hard to put into words. It's like if someone walks up near you while you have your back to them or while you're distracted. You'll just get a feeling that someone is near you, and it was kind of like that, and also nothing like that. As I said, it's very hard to describe. Later, when I was in my early 20s, I began to do research on what the creatures were in hopes of finding out what they wanted. At first, all I could find was stuff about sleep paralysis, but again, that wasn't exactly what was happening to me. Like I said, I was never actually paralyzed, not in the same way most people describe. I could move if I really focused on my body, however, that was not an easy feat. It was like I was in a weird trance where I was filled with terror. My heart would pound, and I could feel that cold ball in the pit of my stomach. It took a huge amount of effort to fight past that feeling, but with practice, over more years than I can guess, I was eventually able to accomplish this, reliably. Later, when I was in my late 20s, I decided I was done letting these beasts, these bastards, have this much control over me. So I began to ignore them. When I would wake, I would either just turn on the TV or watch videos on my phone, just waiting for them to leave. But the whole time I would act like they weren't there. This, as it turns out, was a huge mistake, though I had no idea of it at the time. But then again, how could I have possibly known that what I was essentially doing was precisely what they wanted? I quickly found that if I moved, they moved. At first I didn't care. I was so tired of living in fear, so tired of feeling that I was alone and crazy for roughly an hour every day. They didn't really do anything. They would just seem to move around the room I was in, almost as if they teleported. I later found out how they moved, and teleporting wasn't exactly the right word. It was more like they would fade out of the reality that I live in and fade into their realm. Or dimension, I have no idea what to call it. They then would just phase back into my reality at a different spot. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, so how exactly did I find out the method for travel? Even though you likely already know. I managed to make this discovery completely by accident. I awoke at around 3:30 a.m. one morning. I felt the urge most people feel after sleeping for a while, and I had to use the bathroom. I had taken a couple of sleeping pills the night before, so I was having a lot of trouble, or because I was having a lot of trouble winding down and getting tired, and I knew I had to get up early for work, so I popped a couple of tablets, and after half an hour, sleep slowly began to overtake me. I was still feeling groggy when I awoke. I sat up on the side of the bed. I knew they were there, I could feel them, but I didn't bother looking around for them, and I hadn't realized that I had basically given them the ability to move. I also didn't know that by allowing them to do this, they grew stronger and more substantial in my reality. What does that mean? Well, it simply means that every time they were able to phase back and forth between our realities, they would gain strength which they used to manipulate my reality. I didn't know it at the time, but they had a plan for me. one that I wish I had never discovered. After I had finally started acting like they didn't exist and provided them with the power to move in my reality, they started biding their time, using every night to gain strength, something that they might not have ever been able to do in my lifetime, since initially they could only fade into my reality once per visit, but now they could essentially do this at will, and they took full advantage of this. It only took them a few months before they had grown strong enough to begin to put their plan into action, a plan that will end with them possessing my very soul. So, back to how I discovered they were not from my reality. I was sitting on the side of the bed, half asleep, feeling groggy, and needed to go to the bathroom. I reached and felt around the nightstand until I felt my hand bump my phone. The screen lit up and showed the time. It was 3:59 a.m. If I had known then what I know now, I would have just sat there, completely still for that last minute. But I was just in a different frame of mind. Had I not been so groggy and my bladder not felt like it was filled to bursting, I would have waited. But as you already know, this isn't what happened. So I stood up and began to stumble towards the bathroom. The room was almost completely dark. I live in a pretty rural area, so there aren't any real lights outside except for the occasional car passing by. But this didn't matter to me. I had moved into this small house over 10 years ago and knew the layout like the back of my hand, so I could find my way around without needing much light, and I didn't want to wake myself up too much anyway and turn on the light. That would have been a jolt to my senses that I just wasn't in the mood for. I made my way to the bedroom door and then turned left to walk down the short hallway that led to the bathroom, which sat roughly at the end of the hall. I had made it about 3 steps when I saw it. The best way to describe this moment would be, imagine you're walking with your head down and then you walk too close to something. A wall, a person, it doesn't matter. It's just that you see something out of the corner of your eye and your body senses you're near something. That was essentially what happened. It was like I was about to walk into something. I jerked my head up, adrenaline and fear forcing me instantly awake and on alert. It was like there was a solid black presence mere inches from me. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but was much taller than me. I'm not an especially tall guy, but I'm not a midget either. I stand at around 6 feet tall, and this thing towered above me, its head having to bow forward at the ceiling, meaning that it was at least over 8 feet tall, because that's about as high as the ceiling in my house is. Now you may wonder how the hell I could even see a shadowy figure in the darkness. It was darker than the darkness. I know that sounds dumb, but that's exactly what it looked like. A darkness that was so complete that no light could penetrate it. I quickly shut my eyes, took a deep breath, and proceeded to make the direst decision of my life. I stepped forward, intending to just walk through the figure, my mind reasoning that if it looked like a shadow, then it should also behave like a shadow. In other words, that it would have no substance, no real matter. As soon as my body touched the dark figure in front of me, I felt my entire reality was ripped away. I had no body, which meant that only screams that would come were from my consciousness. I could feel what felt like wind. It was freezing cold and seemed to pass through me, much like I myself were a shadow. It was the most unsettling feeling I had ever experienced. It was like I could feel everything around me, like I was still a real person, but I had no form. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel everything. It was kind of like my soul had left my body. I then began to feel like my body, for lack of a better word, began to form around me again. I began to feel heavier, like I was gaining substance. After a few moments, I could feel my eyes again. I opened them slowly, but could only see darkness around me. I didn't feel anything else around me at first. However, I could tell that I was moving forward. My body felt like it was floating in water. It felt exactly the same, but it wasn't water I was floating in. It was the aura of the god of this realm. Strangely, I wasn't scared. It actually felt nice, just like floating on one of those lazy river rides at a water park. You just let the weightlessness wash over you, and you begin to feel your whole body just melt into the water. It's amazingly relaxing, but also like riding the high a heroin addict experiences. You don't want it to end. You want this feeling of nothingness, this feeling of almost euphoria to last forever. And that is a very dangerous path to walk. Much like walking a very narrow ledge, one misstep and you will fall. I don't know how long I drifted along in the darkness, but it felt like many hours. I didn't care. It was so nice and so relaxing, so I just laid back and let the current take me. I was floating on my back and I could feel the water cradling me. After a while, I suddenly began to feel different. While just minutes earlier I had not had a single care in the world, I was now filled with all types of terrifying thoughts. I began to wonder where I was. Maybe I had had some kind of stroke or something and was still lying in the hallway, possibly on the brink of death. This thought terrified me because I would likely lay there for a few days at least before anyone noticed I was even missing. I had friends and family, but no one that I talked to every day, so no one would be looking for me immediately. Then I began to wonder if I had somehow fallen into a sinkhole, into some kind of underground lake. I wondered how deep the water was. I mean, I could essentially float for a really long time, but I would need water and food eventually. And while I felt like I was floating in water, something was telling me that it wasn't exactly safe to drink. I also wondered how long I had been here and was there any way out. I thought briefly about trying to backstroke in a single direction in the hopes of finding a ledge or a way out of the water, but I dismissed this idea quickly. I was in a pitch black area. I didn't know if I was in a cave or I didn't know. I even and even if I did find my way out of the water, what would I do then? I couldn't see anything and was likely just going to end up falling or hurting myself. The current suddenly started getting stronger. I could feel my body rushing along with it, being tossed to side slightly. My stomach dropped and fear washed over me as I began to visualize myself being thrown into unseen rocks or God knows what else, since I had no idea where the hell I was. The current continued getting faster and faster, my body now being violently whipped around and water periodically covering my face as the current would push me up and down. I had closed my eyes and kept them that way as soon as I felt the current picking up, but I could see a light through my eyelids. At first, I thought it was my imagination, like a blind person seeing random flashes of light, but it didn't go away, and seemed to only get brighter. I opened my eyes and could see what looked like a ball of light hovering in the distance. When I first saw it, it looked about the size of a basketball, but the light was intense. But that could have also been due to the total darkness that surrounded me. It got larger and larger as my body raced towards it. I went faster and faster the closer I got to it, until I was moving at what felt like an almost impossible speed, so fast that my entire body lifted out of the water briefly before slamming back down, dipping under its surface for just a few seconds, before again being lifted above the surface. It had to be incredibly far away, I thought, because I was taking so long to reach it. When I was close enough that it was roughly the size of a car, I began to feel scared. No, that's not a big enough word to describe it. Terrified, frightened. It was more like a pissing down my entire life, or pissing down my life, ready to give up every secret I had. It was that kind of fear. I began to fight the current, trying to use my arms to slow my rate of speed, but I'll just imagine fighting water. It's just absorbing everything, and you can't hurt it, so you have no choice but to just give in. And that is exactly what I was forced to do, because it didn't take me long until I was too exhausted to continue to fight. I just gave up and closed my eyes. After what felt like several more minutes, I suddenly felt my body jerk to a stop. It was so rattling, my teeth literally smashed together. So hard that I was surprised at least a few of them hadn't been cracked or broken. My brain felt scrambled after just being violently thrown against my skull. I shook my head slightly, my neck feeling stiff and weird. I brought my hand up and placed it on the back of my neck, and nothing felt different. I pushed my head back and down, while pressing my hand upwards towards the back of my head, and could feel my neck pop gently a few times, and the weird feeling began to slowly dissipate. I opened my eyes and stared at what looked like a soft white wall of light. I suddenly just knew that this was the sphere that I had been hurtling towards. The light began to pulse slightly. My heart began to race, and the pulsing got faster until it was pulsing in time with my heartbeat. This made me feel oddly connected to, well, I didn't know what it was at the time. That feeling made me feel calmer, and my pulse slowed, which in turn caused the pulse of the light to slow. "Where am I?" I asked in a small voice that didn't sound like my own. I suddenly jerked forward into the sphere. It was much darker inside, though there was some faint light coming in from some small cracks in various spots in what would have been the walls, ceiling, and floor had I been standing in a room, a traditional room. It was room-like in that it was an enclosed space, but it was more like standing outside in a wasteland at night. The ground felt sand-like under my feet, which made me afraid to move at first. I'm a clumsy person, so walking in the sand in a dark area did not seem like the wisest idea. Let's just say it didn't take long for me to change my mind. A few moments later, after I was pulled inside the sphere, I began to hear these whooshing sounds, kind of like a strong gust of wind. It would last a few seconds, then it would be silent, then I would hear it again, and it would sound closer. It sounded like something was coming from behind me. I listened intently for a short while, desperately trying to come up with a plan. The plan that I went with was just to run. As the whooshing got within, I'd say roughly 50 feet of me, it turned into what I can only describe as the scream of a banshee. It sent chills down my spine and sent me into immediate fight or flight. Let's just say fighting barehanded with some unknown creature wasn't going to be my first choice. I broke into a full run, stretching my gait as far as I could, hoping to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was making that awful wailing noise. My eyes scanned the darkened area, hoping to find a possible weapon, or maybe some kind of shelter, anything that might aid my survival. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw a glimpse of something. I angled my running slightly in that direction so that I could get a better look, and it looked like an old shack. It didn't look particularly sturdy, but maybe there was something inside I could use to defend myself. I turned farther to the right, making my way towards the cabin. Then, the same blackness from earlier was in front of me. I couldn't stop and ran right through it. It felt like I had run through an oven. The air inside the space the creature stood hundreds of degrees hotter than the air around it. Thankfully, I was through it in less than a second. It screamed again, its hot breath hitting my back. The gust of hot air was incredibly strong, causing me to lurch forward and almost fall. I was able to regain my footing and found that I was only about 20 feet from the shack. I slowed only a moment as I turned the doorknob of the front door. The creature screamed again, just as I was crossing the house's threshold, the force rattling the house on its foundation. I slammed the door closed and was thrust into silence. It was very unnerving for the creature's scream to have been cut off so abruptly, but I quickly shook it off. I leaned my forehead against the door and took a few deep breaths. Then I mustered the courage to turn towards the interior of the house. I was astonished at what I saw. Outside the house had looked like a one-room shack, but inside it was a large multi-story home. I was standing in a foyer with a large staircase directly in front of me. It led up to a landing on which I could see several doors. To my left and right were large empty rooms, each with 2 to 3 doors, which I assumed led to different rooms. There was a soft light filling the room that appeared to have no source. I stood looking around, wondering where I should head first, when I heard the sound of a door creaking open. It was coming from upstairs. I looked up and could see one of the doors on the landing slowly swinging open. It was like a scene out of a horror movie, and like most morons that star in horror movies, I climbed the stairs and headed for the opening door. It was weird. It was like I didn't even think about it. I just went for the door. I never questioned why it was opening or even wondered what was waiting on the other side. I entered the room, and in the center of the room sat a small round table. On the table sat a small blue sphere. It was about 6 to 8 inches around and seemed to hover above the shiny surface of the table. There was an ornate chair sitting by the table, turned outward as if welcoming me to sit. I walked to the chair and slowly sank into it, pulling it around so that I was facing the table. I stared at the blue sphere and could feel that it wanted me to touch it. I obliged and raised both hands, cupping the small ball in my hands. Electricity ran up my arms, straight into my brain. It felt like every blood vessel in my head was on fire, every moment of my life flashing before my eyes. The orbs seemed to absorb them. The fiery pain in my head was then replaced by a cooling sensation as the orb pushed its consciousness into mine. Suddenly, I knew everything it did. I could see the entire history of its people. They lived in an alternate dimension that ran alongside my own. They had been starving for years, trapped in this endless wasteland. They then discovered a food source: human souls. A human soul would feed them for several years. However, they were not easy to come by. There were some rules that restricted them from taking souls. First, people had to be able to see them when they appeared in the human realm, and that number was not high at all. Second, the person had to grow complacent in their arrival, so that when I started to ignore them, or so when I had started to ignore them and moving around as if they weren't there, that had been what they wanted. That's also why they came between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m. It was another way to make me feel like it was just something to expect, so that I would eventually drop my guard. There's something about human fear and their nature of freezing when scared that also causes the creatures to freeze in our realm. They can't phase back to their realm. Each time they pass through the veil that separates their dimension from ours, they grow stronger. When they first pass through, they are a thin layer of their total being. With each pass through, they are able to take on another layer into our dimension. Then, after a time, they grow strong enough to pull us into their realm. But much like how they cannot fully bring their entire being into our dimensions, humans come into their dimensions one layer at a time. It sounds weird, I know, but that's the best way I can explain it. They can now drag me through the dimension at will, my only reprieve being that it takes about a day for a new layer to set, so I can only be pulled back and forth once a day. So ironically, they still come every night between 3 and 4 a.m. I'm in my own dimension now, but I am only one layer away from being whole in the other. I'm typing this out on my phone as a warning to anyone else that has ever seen the shadowy figures lurking around them. If you are one of the unfortunate ones that has been blessed with this curse, I have one thing to say. When you see them and feel that all too familiar terror that locks your body in place, remember this one thing. Do not fight that feeling. Don't move. Don't let yourself ever believe that it's just some normal part of your life. Never give them a chance to get strong enough to take you. And that's where it ends.
Ooh, spooky.
So, for those that have managed to stick around throughout the entire episode, this story was actually written by The Bell.
Ta-da! It was.
So, we do hope you enjoyed that one. I certainly did.
We'll be continuing on with some more famous creepypastas. We're going to be wrapping up the series talking about Slender Man and the Russian sleep experiment. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to
Stay disturbed.